Today we're looking at Birmingham Pen Company's Allegheny Arsenal Gunpowder Black. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. I get inks, test them, and share the results with you. Birmingham's Allegheny Arsenal Gunpowder Black is a black ink, as the name says. Before we get to the writing samples, we're going to take a look at some sciencey bits. Up first is a chromatography, and I agree with Vita that I've learned a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down, I put it into water for about 10 to 15 seconds, and I let it creep up. And we see that this black is a very purple black, which can make it appear a lot darker as a black on the page. It is fantastic. We really see that purple creeping up and the gray on bottom. Now the one on the right I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it into the water for the 10 to 15 seconds. The bottom gray line is much darker, but other than that, the chromatography looks the same, which means I don't think it's going to be any kind of a problem to clean. Resistance tests are done to see how it can be expected to hold up on paper and how hard it might be to clean out of my pens. I let the smear dry for 3 days before I test it. Looking at the highlighter, it's a kind of surprising result. I expected it to smear a whole lot more, and it didn't. It held up very well after 3 days to the highlighter, which is surprising given the other chemicals. The water definitely got it moving again, which was the reason that I expected the highlighter to move. The water's picking up a lot of that black, but leaving some of the gray and purple behind. Pen flush completely brings out the purple. It is showing the purple that makes this a dark black ink. We see a lot of it move. We see a lot of it smear away. And bleach, I'm not giving this a whole minute on the paper. I'm giving it about 30 seconds on the paper. And we see that bleach is really lifting it right off the page. This is a bell curve, or a normal distribution. For the 365 inks I've tested, I found an average viscosity of 2.5. But keep in mind that 2.1 to 2.9 is normal. Birmingham's Allegheny Arsenal Gunpowder Black has a viscosity of 1.34, which when we look at it on the bell curve, the white line shows that it is a very wet ink. We see it all the way just underneath that 1.3. We see the white line coming up. That means it's getting closer and closer to water. Now this bell curve is for the average dry time. For the 365 inks I tested, I found an average dry time of 17 seconds. And here, normal is 13 to 21 seconds. That means it's one standard deviation away from the average of all of the samples. Birmingham Pen Company's Allegheny Arsenal Gunpowder Black has an average dry time of 14 seconds, which we see is on the faster side of normal, but it is within normal, but it certainly is faster on that side, but normal. To find my average dry time, I average the extra fine and medium nib during my writing samples on Clairefontaine, Tomoy River, and Rhodia paper. Now let's look at the writing samples. I got this ink in sample form. Now, Birmingham Pen Company's samples come in these neat little bottles. And they'll say, difference better than better. And that can be true. And this was neat when I got it. I saw and I said, wow, that's really stepping up something like just getting a sample. But here's the thing. You can't fill even the first time from this sample. You barely can get the pen in, and you might get some ink, but you don't get very much ink. And on top of that, it's got this little plastic thing inside. And on this little plastic thing, you heard it. It pops up. So this little plastic thing, I already get some on my fingers from it. It pops up. It makes this mess. So the thing about this mess that it makes, and I couldn't figure out at first where the mess, I'm already popping on the paper. I couldn't figure out about this mess. And then I wound up putting a paper towel underneath it. Now there was the one spill, but look at all the spatter that happened all the time I was opening these bottles. So I like that they went a new direction. They said, let's try something new. I really appreciate that in this. I do. But you know what would be great? If I could fill my pen easily. So I like that they did this. I do. I want them to go to something where I can fill my pen a little easier than this. It's neat, but let's go with something easier. Enough on how that comes. I take my writing, or to keep things consistent in my writing samples, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub. And I use a X450 with a Goulet medium and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. Trying to keep consistent in writing samples and see some different things. So up first is Clairefontaine. We see this ink has some decent shading, maybe sometimes, not in the 1.1. No, it doesn't want to do it. When I'm going to talk about this for shading, I'm talking about how it's going to come out different with different nibs. It does not shade in a single nib. Look at this. The fine, nothing. Straight across. It's supposed to be a black. I'm going to call it a very dark gray. Very, very dark gray. I don't know that I would call it black. We can. I guess a very dark gray could be black. It behaves. It doesn't bleed. It doesn't ghost. It doesn't feather. It doesn't spread. It doesn't shade. It's not bad. It doesn't shade. It's a nice color. I love that they named their stuff the way they do. I think it's great. I like that it only took 9 seconds to dry on the Clairefontaine. Look at the color difference between the extra fine and the medium. Medium, way darker. I would call that medium a black. I wouldn't call the extra fine a black. I would call that a gray. I would call the 1.1 a gray. Medium, definitely a black. So it has shading when you're talking about what pen and how wet that pen is. Absolutely no shade when we look at the scrub. When we look at the smear, you could recover it. It's not going to be the end of the world. Moving on to Tomoe River. No bleed. Show through. It's Tomoe River. This is what's going to happen. No feather. No spread. No shade. No sheen. Straightforward. Not horrible. Depends on what you look for in your inks. My number one thing I'm going to go for every single time is going to be shading. If an ink doesn't have shading, I don't want to go get the bottle. I know I'm going to be disappointed with it. It doesn't have shade, but if shade is not the thing you're after, this isn't going to be it. It's also not going to be the ink you want if sheen is what you want. I know that was big for a little while. Looking at the 1.1, it doesn't perform horrible. It does give a nice color. On the extra fine, it performs perfectly well. Perfectly good ink. It's not an ugly color. It's a nice color. Very professional color. 13 seconds to dry on Tomoe River. That medium, great black right there. Great black on the medium. All the way through. 21 seconds to dry, but this is Tomoe River. Absolutely no color variation when we get to these scrubbies. And the smear, there is no recover of that. You lost it. Rhodia. On the Rhodia paper, we get some bleed spots. Now, I would want to call that me, but it's across the top all the way. So it started to bleed. I don't know what happened there, but it did start to bleed a little bit in the heaviest spot. Otherwise, no ghosting, so not too bad. No feather, no spread, no shade, no sheen, straightforward. 1.1, very nice. Nice color. Not my color. Nice color, though. Definitely a darker gray than what we had on the Tomoe River. On the extra fine, again, a straightforward color. Definitely a middle color between the 1.1 and the medium. It is definitely a middle color. So we're getting that shade when we're talking about different pens and those different pens and their flow. We almost see a little bit of shade on that scrubby. Almost. 9 seconds to dry with that extra fine. On the medium, much darker. Very nice dark ink on that medium.
no shading whatsoever, not in a scrub, not in a single letter. 17 seconds to dry. Without a doubt, you could recover that if you smeared it when you were writing. So if you're a lefty and you like to drag your hand across the paper, you'd be able to read it. Looking at Levenger paper. Now, I like looking at papers that are made by pen companies. Because if a pen company doesn't make nice paper, that just seems lazy. There's pen companies that are making paper that aren't making nice paper. And it seems lazy. So we get no bleed. Tiny spot. Is that a tiny spot? That's a tough call right there. Nope, that's a transfer spot because it does not line up with a letter on the other side. I thought I might have had a moment of bleed. It does not bleed. It's a nice thick paper. It sort of has the weight of Clairefontaine. I don't know the weight of this particular paper though. So we're looking at the 1.1 stub. So what I see is when I made my spelling error and I went back, I got a dark spot. The nice thing about that dark spot is that means if I had to, I guess I could make shading occur with the 1.1. I could make it occur. But I don't know that I want to have to do that. But I guess it does exist there. Extra fine, looking at it. No shading, no feather, no spread, no sheen. Still a middle color. Performs really well. 7 seconds to dry. I'm a fan of the Levenger paper. I like it. I just wish it wasn't so expensive to get a hold of. The medium nib, much darker still. Just like all the others. Still much darker. Uniform color all the way through. 10 seconds to dry. No feather, no spread, no shade. None of that. Looking at the scrubby, that extra fine starts to give me a little bit of shade, but that took a lot of ink to do that. Nothing on the medium. And on these smears, both of those, without a doubt, you're recovering them. And then there's black and red paper. So I need the black and red notebook. No bleed. No ghosting. Black and red was sort of hit and miss with me. A lot it did really well. Occasionally it did not. Looking at the top, the 1.1 stub. Much lighter in how this is coming through. Not a bad color. I actually like the color on this paper with the stub. I like the color. I don't write with a stub a whole lot. I wish I could have got that color out of the extra fine. There's a nice color. The extra fine color is nice. It is definitely in the middle. We see the shade in the nib, not in the writing. Looking at that extra fine writing, no shading. But there's no feather, no spread, no shade. Nothing like that. Nothing special. 5 seconds to dry. The black and red paper tends to be a bit more absorbent. Medium, much darker, definitely a black ink. No feather, no spread, no shade, none. 7 seconds to dry. Look at the scrub, almost no shade. Tiny bit occurs with the extra fine. And it's hit or miss whether or not you would be able to recover that if you smeared it. So that's what I got for the writing part.
Instead of finding inks that look like Birmingham's Allegheny Arsenal Gunpowder Black, I prefer to find an ink that would complement that ink on the page. And I've chosen Birmingham Pen Company's Fred Rogers Cardigan Red because of it being a nice dusty red color. Before I give my opinion on this ink, I'm asking if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And if it's your first time here, I'd invite you to subscribe. To make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples, then use a different pen for a day with this ink in it. And for today's video, I took my notes with a Nemosine Singularity with a fine nib. So what do I think about Birmingham's Allegheny Arsenal Gunpowder Black? I think it's a very good performing ink. I don't think it's dark enough for me as a black. I prefer my blacks to be super black. And because the black you get can be varied quite a bit depending on the nib and flow, it's not necessarily the black for me, but it is a very nice black. And in the Nemosine, it gave a nice dark gray. So would I purchase a bottle of this ink? Yes, I would. It's a very nice ink. I like historical nature in things. I don't like their sample bottles, but I would go for a sample before a bottle of any ink. Maybe except for the Birminghams because their samples Their bottles are interesting. Yeah, thank you.